Hello, everyone.
Oh, Kevin, I'm going to introduce you. Believe it or not, you deserve an introduction. I love that everyone's here. I love that little piece of music, just kind of taking us into our late night. We've never tried this before at the Center Film Festival, but of course we've never tried a virtual film festival. So it's that kind of night/day. I am so excited about this block. It's keeping me awake, clearly. And I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And if you're watching it, most of you will be watching this recorded tomorrow morning, which might have been the wiser thing to do. But we're here, Insomnia special. So basically what was really exciting about this part of the festival was I had discovered this documentary, Love Express by Kuba Mikurda. First of all, because I have a connection with the National Polish Film School through a couple of the professors there. Kuba's a professor there. Plus, it's about a Polish filmmaker that I've known about and heard about, and was very intrigued to hear that he made a film about it. You'll be hearing a lot more about that, or you've already watched it and you're here to have the conversation. And the distributor that worked on getting my film onto a platform got his film onto a platform during the time of when COVID first started hitting us. And as filmmakers, we were having a really hard time figuring out how we're going to get our films out. And Love Express played theatrically through the same platform that you're enjoying this film festival through right now. So that's Theatrical at Home. So we have all these wonderful connections. And I called them and I said, do you think that we could reach out to them? And then coincidentally, I was able to discover that he works with some of my colleagues or friends and colleagues over at the National Polish Film School in Łódź. You're going to hear a lot more about that school through Kevin Hagopian, who's my colleague and friend here in State College, Pennsylvania. He is someone that most of us turn to help us get our heads around some film history with a sense of humor, depth, and intrigue. And so I think you're going to have a really great time talking to Kevin Hagopian, despite the fact that he has a bookshelf behind him at 1:45 a.m. Jovan James and Elegance Bratton did the film, directed the film called Buck, which was also part of another series that we put together, another block that we put together called Finding Joy. And it ended up becoming a rescreen only because there was a side of the short that I thought would be really interesting to put together with Kuba's work. I thought this can be a more in-depth conversation about sexuality, sex, eroticism, and the camera, and both from behind and in front of the camera. And of course, that's where Rani Deighe Crowe's work comes in. She's the writer and I think the producer too, right, of Quiet on Set. We had a conversation earlier with her and the director, Jeanette L, about what it is like to talk about questions of women in front of and behind the camera and where are the lines. So this gives them an opportunity, or Rani an opportunity, to talk more about the sexuality part of it, the choices she makes as a director based on sexuality, sex, and using the camera to try and tell stories along those lines. So I'll stop talking, although it's one of the things that is keeping me awake. So I might change my mind and come back in. So we'll see what happens. This has been an incredible day, an incredible experience. And sorry, but I gotta say it, it's the cherry on the cake. So Kevin, take it away. Don't have too much fun without me. And if you do, I might get jealous and I'll be back. Late night at the Center Film Festival, Q&A at 1:45 a.m. Enjoy.
Well, we'll keep our eye on chat here to see when the cues come in. But in the meantime, let me just welcome all of you to the Center Film Festival. All of your films, Pearl and her curators have grouped them in this section of the festival that deals with eroticism. But I think as I watch all of your films, what I got a really strong sense of was not so much that they are only films which are erotic, as much as they're films about kind of who owns eroticism. And I wondered if maybe if each of you could speak to that. Rani Deighe Crowe, if you could to me, that was a really strong theme in Quiet on the Set. Whose eroticism is this that filmmakers make for us, provide for us?
Yeah. So Quiet on Set is a short film. It's only 8 minutes. And it's about a sexual assault, sexual violation that occurs on a film set during the filming of a sex scene. And it's sort of constructed as far as like who is complicit, who is exploited. And it was my response when I wrote it. It was my response to the Me Too movement, really, and sort of concentrating like, how can you like make the most. This is a situation where we have an actress who has agreed to do a scene. They have agreed to do this. They've agreed to do that. But there's a point where they haven't agreed to something. And everybody's watching, but nobody sees it. And not only that, but they're filming it. And then we're all consuming it. And so we're all complicit in the consumption and participation of this. And so in constructing it, like there's two things. There's like the film within a film. So it starts with like this sexy film scene, and you have to create, it has to be sexy. So the audience has to sort of start to feel like, yes, sexy. And then suddenly there's a moment where you're like, oh, fuck, it's not sexy. Sorry, excuse my language. It's not sexy. There's something else happening here. There's a violation. There's something uncomfortable. There's a cringe moment where you realize that you have started to feel sexy about something where somebody is being exploited, is being violated, something else is happening. And, and then it's kind of the story is the actress, does she pursue her accusation and trying to convince people of what happened, which, she's running up against walls and nobody wants her to do that because it's going to destroy the film, which she also has a stake in. Meanwhile, her participation is going to go on to be consumed by many people, and she's going to be congratulated for it. And that's what it's about. And it's a response to the Me Too movement and a lot of things that happened, but it's also in response to lots and lots and lots of stories that we read. And we've done a few films that involve sex. And a lot of my films involve sex or intimacy or something, but it's always constructing them in a way. I always try to construct them in a way where the actors have to review. There's as little as possible. Does it really have to be nude? Is it about being sexual, or is it about it's not always about being sexual. It's not always a sexual scene. It's about something else. And so, you really kind of consider that as you're directing that. We just need to get enough to make it feel like it really is a sex scene, but it's not actually a sex scene. The sex scene is something further within the plot or the story of the film. I don't know if that makes sense. It does to me because I'm thinking things.
Yeah, it does, Rani Deighe, absolutely. Jovan and Elegance, Buck is a film that has a really, I can't think of a better word for it, a sensuous texture to it. There's a velvety feel to the cinematography to it. There's a real sultriness to the images. But what happens to in the life of your protagonist is anything but sexy in some easy to understand way. What were the various feelings that you wanted us to have about this character's experiences? There are several in the film, his several different kinds of ways of relating to his own and others' sexuality. What were the various feelings you wanted us to get? And by the way, Jovan and Elegance, since some people are going to be listening to this without having seen your film, could you, at least we hope that they will be interested and go see the film, but could you give us a one-line description of the film?
sure.
A one-line description of the movie you've just spent months and months and months of your life making complex. I need you to reduce that to like one line.
That's the fun part. That's the part that gets it sold.
That's the marketing team. Let's do it. So Buck follows a depressed young Black gay man in the midst of a downward spiral, who turns to drugs, sex, debauchery in order to feel something, in order to fill this void that he feels he has. And when he goes to a party one night, he experiences a betrayal from a relationship that he thought was stable. It wasn't a conventional relationship, but it was one that he thought he knew what it was. But he found that when he's going there to get drugs, that he actually was the drug of choice, that his Black skin, his Black maleness was actually something that was being consumed the entire time. And once he leaves that party in a very intoxicated state, he is essentially rescued by an empathetic stranger who relates to him in his depression and his nightlife, and they have connection over his HIV AIDS status and their reliance on medication. So I would say, as far as the sensuality of it, I really viewed Lynn as someone with intimacy issues, who was in this sort of toxic relationship. And, we wanted to contrast that with the reality of this party. And so we took the time to really build this sort of, in my mind, a dark, horrific, unpredictable, claustrophobic, sexy, but, a little sleazy landscape where, this young man is looking for comfort, but he walks in on something that he never expected.
Yeah. It was also really important, I think, when you talk about the sensuous kind of gaze of it all, to show how this young man is seen in the gay world. And, I'm a photographer first. I'm a really big student of people like Robert Mapplethorpe and Pete Hujar and Rajanovitz, I think that's how you say it, and many others from that time period, Nan Golden as well. And if you look at their work, there's a real focus on kind of like young people at the peak of attractiveness, and how being at the peak of attractiveness draws them into dangerous situations, especially considering like Nan Golden's work, where it's taking place in the 80s and half of everybody in her work is HIV positive and dies of AIDS. So, there's this kind of idea of like the kind of illicit nature of youth in and of itself, and that when often one is the most desired, comes this kind of quagmire around agency and choice. So I think it was important to show that Len is a beautiful young man in a very, very ugly situation.
Elegance was, as you mentioned that, I'm just wondering, at a certain point in your film, our protagonist meets an older man who they have a very direct conversation, and much of the dialogue in the rest of the film is purposefully elliptical and kind of partial. Was that character, that older male character, inspired at all by the references that are important to you to the AIDS crisis of the 1980s?
Oh, for sure.
Speaking from that, out of that generation.
Excuse me. I don't normally drink whiskey this late. Yeah, for sure. Particularly, I was inspired, or we were inspired by the just the fact that, like, in recent history, we've seen a lot of examples of the white gay contributions in the fight against AIDS. Movies like Dallas Buyers Club and Milk is another one, and When We Rise, and I'm trying to think of the other one too that's really, really kind of poignant to this conversation.
Didn't they do a Stonewall movie?
There's that. I hated that movie. But no, like, you know, we've seen a lot of kind of lionization of like what white gay men have done to save us all from AIDS. What we have not done is kind of acknowledged and lift up the work that, you know, intergenerational work that was done amongst Black gay men in the crisis, for whom was even more catastrophic, and it remains catastrophic. You know, 1 out of 2 Black gay men in their lifetimes will be HIV positive. There's a massive epidemic of depression in the Black gay community as well. So people are, you know, under duress. And this character, Harris, who discovers Lynn, is inspired by those men back in the day who kind of hung up their cruising shoes and went out and tried to educate and save a generation of people. So by kind of living in the generational support element of the story, I definitely want to raise up people like Marlon Riggs and people like Joseph Beam. And, you know, although they're not mentioned by name, they're definitely in my mind.
Elin Harris as well.
Elin Harris, right?
Yeah.
And Harris.
Yes.
Get it? I don't know.
Well, it seems like in this fiction, in this work of fiction, in that character, you pay homage to that generation and their sacrifices through the medium of a fictional character, which is a very cool thing. You know, as opposed to, you could certainly do the same thing in a documentary. Right. But to take that trope of intergenerationality and mentorship within a very sexual structure and do it in a work of fiction is really cool.
Thank you.
I want to jump over to Kuba to ask the very same question. In Love Express, well, first of all, tell us again a short description of the movie, and then I'll ask this question again about who owns eroticism. Oh, you're muted, Kuba.
Yeah, sorry. I guess it's easier to talk about eroticism, you know, late Saturday night in Pennsylvania than early Sunday morning in Poland, right? So, but yes, my film is about Polish-French filmmaker Walerian Borowczyk, who gained a cult status mainly in France in the 1970s, and he started as a visual artist, as an animator back in Poland in the 50s, as a sort of surreal, experimental animator, and then he moved to France. He gained a recognition as an animator, and then gradually he moved to live-action filmmaking. And then the 70s came by, and the sexual revolution, and he started making films which were very true to his spirit, avant-garde spirit, path-breaking erotic films. But then, bit by bit, he got sort of sucked into sort of more and more sleazy circuits, and end up being labeled as like this chic pornography maker, basically. So this is the way we call the film for ourselves. Like it's as we had the Exit Through the Gift Shop, right? About Banksy. We called our film Exit Through the Sex Shop, in a way, right? So you start with this sort of avant-garde attitude. You start with, you know, very clear intentions of making eroticism, of taking into the barricades, right? To free, with the ideals of freedom, which are very close to Borowczyk's heart. And then suddenly it turns out that you're in, right? That it's locked in, that the label is put upon you, and it's very difficult to get away with this label. So that was the basic arc of the character and the tragedy of the character, like the proper tragedy, since Borowczyk from the very beginning, if there was something that defined him, was an attempt to avoid every label. You know, when he started being recognized as an animator, he said, all right, now I want to make live action films. When he got this recognition by all this like Cahiers du Cinema people, and he started being called the master of cinema alongside Bresson, for example, or Buñuel. He said, all right, now I will do something completely different, and he made up Immoral Tales and The Beast, which were very difficult to swallow for the sort of educated, opinionated audience. So at every point, he tried to to deal with labels that people were trying to give him, but he couldn't beat this final label. And this is also interesting why this particular label, was so difficult to be dealt with. I guess he wasn't aware that much that what's happening to him, not to himself as an artist, but to his sort of artistic persona. And he wasn't aware of all these power games going on in the field of cinema, particularly in the second half of the 1970s. So he would accept offers from kind of suspicious producers, and then when you start as an animator, and that was also his quality, one of his major traits, that he was used to having total control over the process, total control over the film set, because if your film set is your like a empty space, empty frame, this is what you take with you to live action films, and his live action films were exactly like that. Think about David Lynch, for example, on Eraserhead. I mean, Borowczyk's first film was a similar experience as Lynch's Eraserhead. He sort of locked himself with his crew in an old factory for a couple of months. Funnily enough, it was the May of 1968, so a very revolutionary time in Paris at that time. And okay, there's the revolution in the streets of Paris there, and there's Borowczyk in the suburbs somewhere with his crew making this kind of strange film about, okay, it was about power, but it was very Borowczyk's account of what power structure is and how does it work. And I think that comparison, like to Lynch, is quite valid, because again, Lynch also started as an animator at some point, right? And he made his name by these very strange short films, experimental films, very strange imagination. So if we could imagine David Lynch like being labeled as an erotic filmmaker at some point, and then being unable to get out of this shelf, that would be, I guess, a similar experience.
Yeah. I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask Rani Deighe, something that your film led me to think about with all three of the films in this block. Is your film, and I'm going to ask this very same question, is there anything about your film that is a parable? You know what I mean? Like, is there the film itself, if you haven't seen the film, is it has all of the elements of a very strong story, including this kind of what I think is a tremendously powerful reveal, which you really stage well as a writer, and Jeanette stages really well as a director. But I'm just wondering if this is your engagement with the Me Too movement. Are there things that viewers can take from this from this film that actually go beyond the world of the media?
Sure. I mean, like I said, it was the Me Too movement was happening, and then there's just lots, I didn't know how to respond to it. And then this kind of came to me, this way of dealing with it and processing it. And, at the time, Jeanette and I both come from theater as well as film. And so there's a lot happening in theater. When you hear Jeanette talk, she references specifically in 2016, there was a specific event in Chicago theater with a theater company where there was a whole series of events in theater and or film where it became apparent that people were being exploited on stage and on film. And the intimacy coordinator became a thing that started becoming very popular. And you saw different theater movements, different cultures. Jeanette worked a lot in DC theater, but she and I both kind of kept tabs on stuff. And the intimacy coordinator and different communities started having movements towards making theater a safer space for people doing, intimacy work. And you saw it in film too, like HBO was one of the first places where they started having an intimacy coordinator regularly on their sets. And this became like a job and a thing. And then meanwhile, the Me Too movement was unfolding. For me, like I said, it was a response to the Me Too movement, but also it was very connected to these things that we were seeing. I read lots and lots and lots of different articles, and there are lots and lots of stories. It's definitely not specific. This is a fictionalized story, and we made it an independent film because, for one thing, we didn't have the budget to make it anything else, and we know independent film. But Last Tango in Paris, and the stories about Last Tango in Paris. And, Maria Schneider passed away, Bartolucci passed away, but those stories have always haunted me. And so that was definitely a big influence on my mind. The Christine Blasey Ford, sorry, it's 1:45, 2 a.m.
It is.
Just trying to stay up. It was between coffee and wine. I went with wine. But when Christine Blasey Ford was testifying, that was when I was in the second and third drafts, and watching the entire country watch a woman talk about what had happened to her, and watching how everybody was reacting, and everybody was having different responses to this testimony. So, there's a certain amount of it's about like what we don't see, how we interpret information. There's definitely putting somebody in a position where they have to make a choice, whether to pursue an accusation or whether to if she pursues that accusation, that's the writer in me. Like, I'm a writer, I teach screenwriting, but I'm also kind of more of an artist. So I kind of like to push against traditional narrative structures. So, and I'm really, I want to put the viewer in a position where they're having to question their own complicity in the media, in the industry, and sex, and why it's consumed. We are consumers, and that is why it is being made. And also, and it's just like an actress does a sex scene, she consents to these things, she doesn't consent to this. And then it goes off into the world, and with the internet that we have, it is out there forever. And then there are, I made the little website, that was all me. And I had to research like how a sex scene or somebody, takes a nude shot, and it's out in the world forever, and it gets interpreted and consumed and trash talked, and it's out there forever. So, all of these things were sort of part of it.
Yeah. Well, and Rani,
I'm not sure if I answered.
And I'm just, as you're saying that, I'm thinking. I'm sorry, Rani, to interrupt.
It's an 8-minute film. It is trying to do a lot in 8 minutes. So
it does. It really does.
And there should still be things resonating. It took us 3 years to make. So, for this 8-minute film.
Well, it has the narrative breadth of a feature. And I guess as you've been talking, I've been thinking that what the choice to have these pressures and this woman forced to weigh these costs that are associated with either choice, because she's making a movie, you're putting us in the position of, it's not just the people around her who have to ask themselves, are we complicit in this exploitation? But implicitly, we're the ones who watch the movies. So
Right.
it is even, and to hear you say that even, you know, in the first part of the film, you have worked to make their physical relationship as sexy as possible so that we are drawn into it.
Yeah.
So you really do point that up really beautifully. Yeah.
Well, and you know, and we are trying to make it a little bit, you know, it is not like the actor on set, you know, he was not totally, you know, he was, you know, and I know in directing him and in writing it, like, we wanted it to be so that he wasn't a clear-cut bad guy, right? Like there are stories about actors, and I don't want to name names or anything, but who don't like to wear socks or who like to be real in their scene. I mean, acting, theater, film it's a place where we break down barriers, and we don't like to set them up because you need some room to emote and to be in the space and all of these things. And the actor himself may not have thought, you know, he thought he was acting. He thought he was, we wanted the actor playing the part. We wanted there to be some room for, did he think he was a bad guy or not? Was he a bad guy or not? You know? And I mean, even as the Me Too movement unfolds, and I'm definitely believe the woman and support that, but I think about it, like, how many times have I been in unclear situations myself and have done things that I don't know how the other person interpreted it. And I think that's in this world. I think we have, you know, somebody expressed it as we have to have a road for redemption for people, especially as values and generations change. I mean, I'm definitely like, let's stop the power structure and let's listen to women and all of that. But I also think that as we continue forward, we have to recognize, like, we have to give people a path of redemption, and we have to give people, we have to acknowledge that it might not have been clear in some places, and there's some really messy places for what was this thing that happened. You know, what we are calling sexual assault now was not called sexual assault in the 50s, you know, or, you know, the people accept it as different things. So we're talking about a lot of intergenerational conversations and defining things, and we have to let people know, like these are the expectations, and this is giving people agency, and this is not acceptable. And so there's a little bit of that. Like, I want to approach that messiness. I want it to be a little messy, and I want people to be, you know, my hope is that maybe not everybody has the same total agreement of what happens.
Yeah. Jovan and Elegance, as I'm listening to Rani Deighe, I'm thinking that my question about whether your films are parables or not might be kind of dumb, because what Rani Deighe is talking about is how the word she uses is messy. We could talk about fluid. We could talk about constantly shifting, and that's something that I really enjoyed about the film book, is that there's not at least to the first time viewer, there's not a classical kind of story arc going on there. I'm trying to think of a intelligent way to put this, but things are constantly going back and forth. There are the relationships in the film constantly shift as the film goes forward. And I guess I just wondered, how did you begin? Did the film as we see it, did it begin did it look a lot like this when you started to write the film?
It definitely underwent some changes as it was being developed. So, you know, it definitely started off as, you know, sort of a young Black gay man going on a bad date. You know, it started off with that, and sort of how you know, he goes on a date and it doesn't go well, and then he meets someone at the end of the night, and he feels better about it. So it was very simple, basic, and you know, just sort of feeling the story out, finding it from there. And so Elegance and I started to work on it together, and we sort of pushed it further and further, and like sort of, well, what is this date? Who is this person? You know, why are we there? You know, and really fleshing that out and sort of turning it from a one-on-one encounter to what you see now. And another big inspiration for that was when I happened to be in West Hollywood when I read a story about Jamel Moore, a young Black gay man who was homeless and a sex worker, and he died in the house of Ed Buck from a meth overdose. And one thing that bothered me about that, I mean, beyond the many things, was that it did not get a lot of attention. It was sort of a small story in a local paper. There was no national news for I think a year or two. But you know, Elegance and I started doing research into it, finding out about his diary, his relationship with his mother, the other young men who have been at this house and have also taken drugs with Ed Buck. So yeah, we incorporated that into the story, and you know, once that we really locked it in at that point. So yeah, we definitely were, you know, staying open to current events, and you know, like Elegance said earlier, there's an epidemic of depression, there's an epidemic of meth use. So these were issues that, you know, I wasn't really aware of necessarily so much until it got a face for me. That was Jamel Moore's face.
Yeah, and in terms of like kind of the back and forth of it all, you know, it's as Rani was saying, you know, this is you know, sex is messy and consent is messy, and you can be saying yes to an act but not necessarily understanding all of the connotations of the act. And I think that really, it's a pretty, you know, gray and fluid kind of space where because you said yes to one thing, it's assumed that you've said yes to the next thing. So when Lynn is invited to this sex party, he's not told that it's actually a sex party. You know, he arrives and to his surprise, he's what he thought was kind of like a special thing, maybe a toxic thing, but a special thing that he had with this older white man. Turns out that this white man has a whole boat full of men just like him, Black and gay like him, and that what he thought was so special really is not that at all. He's in fact kind of like another, you know, it's an a la carte menu item. He's not really, it dehumanizes him. And unfortunately, though, no one told the partygoers that Lynn didn't know that it was a sex party. So once you walk down the stairs, once you've consented to taking your clothes off at the door, the assumption is that you've consented to being sexual with anyone within the party. And, you know, I've been to those types of events myself, and, you know, a part of it, I mean, even if it's not a sex party, sometimes going to a gay bar, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've been to a gay bar, especially the ones that are dominated by white men, but in all of them really, where, you know, you're touched by people. You do not say it could touch you. You're looked at a certain type of way that you did not necessarily, you know, think that you were going to be looked at. Maybe you wanted to find a person to look at you like that. And now there's, you know, a room full of people looking at you like that. And that can make you feel pretty small. But what makes you feel small is the fact that everyone else is under the assumption that this is okay. So, you know, when Lynn is kind of met with these types of conflicts, it makes him kind of question what indeed he's saying yes to. And ultimately, there is some kind of culpability, I think, in Lynn's character in that, you know, he's not giving his real name either. So, you know, he gives an alias. This man doesn't know him by his real name. So is this person that he's invented to be with him, is this personality consent to this situation? And this is all happening for a young person who's inebriated, who's very young, right? Though I think youth is its own form of intoxication. So, you know, as it all adds up, you're in this murky thing where the only thing that well, one of the things that becomes easiest to do is just to consume more drugs, is to kind of diminish the notion of choice so that you can kind of fit in and feel like you're part of something. And ultimately, I think when I hear Rani talking about Me Too and this kind of situation here where sex is political, where there's power dynamics and some people are powerful and some people are powerless, is that everyone is eager, whether it's Hollywood or in, get the gay sex party world, to be a part of something, to have a sense of like belonging and a sense of community. And when through that sense of community, there's this idea of possibility, right? Where like in Hollywood, it's the opportunities that are passed through the community. And on this sex boat, it's the acceptance that's passed. So I guess everyone in our film has to kind of look at themselves and really determine, am I the predator? Am I the prey? Am I making myself, by being the prey, am I predating somehow? And all of it kind of swirls together in a mess until an act of kindness comes in, an act of human empathy comes in. And that's what resets the table.
In both Buck and Quiet on the Set, I can see a lot of filmmaking choices, and Elegance, you've just described the flow of the kind of the middle of the film to achieve this ethical and moral space that is not melodramatic. Rani, in your film, the people who are on the set who are complicit in the exploitation of this woman, several of them are women, and I'm sure that casting was, I mean, that's huge in your film in terms of the narrative power that is generated out of that circumstance is so three-dimensional rather than two-dimensional. It's not a weak person fighting against strong and evil people. It's transactional. And I thought that was just a great choice. Kuba, I wanted to ask you, there's something really fascinating about Love Express, which is that, I've seen many, many films about filmmakers. And they're not surprisingly they're really celebratory. That's I'm sure that like a lot of people, for me, it was the animation when I saw Borowczyk's work. Your film takes this wonderful kind of left turn when you talk about his move into live action films, and particularly the way you treat the film The Beast. You interview the female lead in that film, and it starts this whole conversation that she is a part of, and that some of his filmmaking colleagues are a part of, other directors like Terry Gilliam are a part of, that says, whose desires are being whose desires are being treated with respect in these films. And the notion that was kind of common at the time is kind of the marketing of these films, like a lot of both hardcore and softcore films during the period of the 1970s, was what was erotic for men was supposed to be de facto erotic for women as well. And your film really takes on that tremendously sexist and heterosexist assumption. Can you talk about how you handle? You're talking about a person who is famous for being an erotic filmmaker, and your film says there's a problem with that, and it's not what was being represented on the screen as much as it is how those representations are inflected by a certain unconscious standpoint. That's really exciting about your film. Can you talk just a little bit more about that?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Actually, it was a problem since the initial idea was to make a documentary about the reception of Borowczyk. That was one of the main goals, and I started looking for filmmakers, both male and female, that would be influenced by his films, right? And then it turned out that they're mostly male. I mean, that actually this experience was important. His films were important for male filmmakers at the time. So, and like male gaze is all around, basically. And the thing I wanted how to formally deal with it. I mean, my idea was that I will have my speakers watch clips from his films live on the set and we will be filming them very closely because I think that actually it's one of the most difficult thing to do to sort of get exposed with your reaction to erotic material on camera and as long as the film itself wasn't that much about it's one of the elements how this male gaze sort of operated at that time. I thought that it would be a solution actually to have this balance reestablished a bit in this way, right? So we can watch them watching and being exposed, either being excited or somehow moved by the erotic material. But you are definitely right. I mean, it was a time when actually it's a very difficult time for us to imagine right now, I guess, and this is what Neil Jordan talks about in the film, that it's easier sort of to imagine for a Renaissance sort of sensibility than actually what was going on in the mid-1970s in France, but also in the States. When you think about Deep Throat and the documentary about Deep Throat, for example, there was this sort of dream, this sort of vision that actually eroticism and sexuality can become part of the mainstream, for mainstream cinema, mainstream approach, that it can sort of be included somehow in the mainstream for storytelling. And then obviously it got split very much from that moment on into the pornographic circuit and VHSs. This all prompted the transition. But at this particular moment, I mean, the idea was that yes, we're witnessing a revolution when for something that was impossible before is now becoming a possibility. And I guess for Borowczyk, it worked like this. I mean, there's something, my background is in psychoanalysis, and when I was thinking about him, there was something pre-Oedipal in his approach to sexuality. I mean, it was almost childish, it wasn't like for this sort of, okay, he approached sexuality, he started making his erotic films when he was already 50, so this is interesting in its own rights, right? But I didn't have any tools or people actually to get closer to Borowczyk's sexuality itself. And that was a problem, and this is why I decided, all right, so let's keep to the mechanism. Let's make a film about something else, right? If we cannot get here, let's get somewhere else, and this somewhere else is the sort of mechanism you were asking, the parable before, how the revolution eats its own children in a way. How you start as a pioneer, you start as a path-breaking artist, and then you get sort of monetized and domesticated by what? By the market forces, by the film critical approach. These are the questions I wanted to pose. But definitely, I mean, there was something both cruel and innocent in his approach to sexuality. With as in, again, I would say for this sort of childish approach, right? When it's not so much about all this like power games going on, like adult power games, but something which is quite paradoxical. And definitely, I mean, we talk about Borowczyk, we don't talk about his actresses, for example, right? And as you noticed, I mean, the actress Lisbeth Hummel, who's the main star of the Beast, and she's quite open about it, that this film changed her life in the negative, right? Because she thought at the beginning that would be again, given the circumstances, given the sort of milieu, you know, that you start in an erotic film by a renowned master like a Buñuel or someone. So that would be, for, you know, a beginning of a beautiful career in artistic film in general, right? But then it turned out that she also got pigeonholed and labeled as the actress from The Beast, and that was pretty much it, you know. So definitely, it changed her careers. But although, and it was a relief, she was very open, and she said, like from her perspective, there is no abuse on the set. So she didn't feel like abused or there was some kind of sexual innuendos. She said it was weird because Borowczyk was so self-obsessed. You know, it was like being a model for a painter's nude. Which I guess says something about his sexuality in between the lines of. But this is something, you know, to be interpreted from the film. But there is a scene from the set when he's sort of preparing the image. And he's so meticulous about it, right? And he seems so, you know, so it seems not sexual. I mean, he's like he's very much focused on the detail, like put your leg up, you know, like, and the rose goes here, and your hand up. No, this is not right. We need to move the sheets and stuff, and the pillow. You know, we need to put the pillow.
But I mean, he's treating her like a prop. You know,
yeah,
like,
he's
like
treating her like a prop, which is obviously, you know, and again, when you think about sexual approaches, I mean, you could maybe find a label for this, right? Is it like a perversion or something like? But definitely, I mean, it's very coherent since, again, he started as an animator, and he keeps on being an animator, and he's treating people as props. He's treating people as his, you know, animated designs in a way. So again. With Borowczyk, it's difficult to the extent that when we're talking about, you know, his gaze or his approach to his actors and actresses, mainly actresses. Okay, it's also about the general like male approach from the times, very particular approach as an animator. So he treats everyone as a prop, right? So he would objectify. Okay. It is objectifying, that definitely, but on top of it, basically, I mean, this is his approach to everything, to everyone, to every single aspect of the reality, and I think this is what makes it quite interesting and quite different from, you know, the typical sort of approach. All right, this is the guy from the 1970s. He's objectifying women. You know, this is the male gaze at its purest. All right, it is, right? But my idea was that we've already talked about it, so let's focus on something different here, maybe more nuanced.
Although, as you're talking about your choice, which I really enjoyed, having these filmmakers look at the images that Borowczyk had created and that they had seen when they were very young men. First of all, you stage it so that it looks like they're looking down into a pool. But I got the feeling as I was watching the film that these men in their 60s and 70s are uncomfortably reliving their own, this is my interpretation, but that they're reliving a time that for them was liberatory, and they're realizing that it wasn't liberatory if you weren't a white male heterosexual whose desires were being catered to. And I thought, like, when Neil Jordan is he's sort of apologizing, you know, I guess that makes me sort of weird. Maybe not, but it points up how much creatures of our time with respect to sexuality that we are. So a quick question for each of you, Jovan and Elegance, what has making this film taught you about, you know, what has it taught you about the stakes involved in representing sexuality?
I think what it's taught me the book has taught me about the stakes involved in presenting sexuality. What it's taught me is that I'm, you know, we kind of had a very serious. I guess what it taught me is that we're capable of presenting it. That we have the ability to do this in a really big way and have an impact on our community that's positive. Jovan and I had a lot of conversations about how the intimacy would run. We did not hire an intimacy coordinator because, like I said, I'm a photographer first. I've shot a lot of images of young people in various stages of undress. And most of those people are people who I have friendships with. And I felt like that experience was enough to be able to inform how we interacted with our actors in that situation, that I knew that I had their well-being at the center of everything that we were doing. So we just made sure we did what made sense to us. I mean, I don't want to sound, flippant or whatever, but to me, the thing you do is you try to write something that's great, and then you talk to the people that help. I mean, this is every department on a film set, whether it's the actors or the gaffers or the sound people. You're trying to create an environment for them to do their best work. To me, the only way you can have that environment is by talking with them and asking them if they have the environment they need to do their best work. And if not, using your team to get it there. So, I think the thing I learned most about presenting this is that, we really are capable of doing it, that that we're not the problem in that way. Integrity keeps us in a good place. And that was really empowering to me.
Yeah, I think I definitely just learned how to, really trust in the vision that we had, that we took so long to develop, that we worked on with our DP, that we worked on with our actors, and not, because I think even, in our education at Tisch, we would face, I think, I would face a lack of, I felt, understanding in the content, or, an aversion to it. Whether people want to admit that or not. And then once we're on set, it's like, so are you able to handle this, as a man, and what I mean by that is, just people just not trust in our work and our craft. And, I wonder where that came from, but, I think it was a time when, someone could have been shaken up because they were, told that in a story like this in the hands of a man cannot go well. And it's like, as gay men, we have a lot to say about consent and, how gay men navigate, consent amongst men when it's not always just about physical domination. It's a lot of other things at play. So once again, just trusting in our vision and not backing down, when things get tricky, we knew we were going into, and we had the trust of our actors, and we feel really great to say, like, they would all come back and work for us, and we, we really love them. So that's like a testament to, how it was done properly. And I'm really proud of that. And I think in the future, we will be using intimacy coordinators, but, that was, we didn't use it that time, but next time we will be using them, because I think they are a great help. So I look forward to, evolving my craft in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Same question. Rani, what about you? You're a filmmaker of long experience. You mentioned your theatrical background. Is what you learned from this film, was it more like reinforcing the kinds of things you already knew, or did it take you to some new place?
I mean, I think I have a good ethic. I think Jeanette has a good ethic. I think we have, as far as how we work, but we usually don't have any money. So we're usually working with very little money. So already our actors are getting very little compensation. and the approach is that hopefully anybody that's working on the film, they are collaborators and they are participating and they want to help contribute to telling the stories. They are partners. We did have an intimacy coordinator on set for a few reasons. One, because of the content, because it was about that, we really wanted to make sure we had all of our bases covered. We come from a background of having worked in universities, so we worked. I'm currently at Ball State, so we had some funding from Ball State, and Jeanette is currently at Ohio University, so we had some support as far as equipment, and we worked with a lot of grad students from Ohio University, and we ended up filming there in Athens, Ohio, and we brought in actors who were former acting that had graduated from the program that we were familiar with. They were no longer students, and so they're a few years out. They're now kind of working out in the world, and the person that we brought on as an intimacy coordinator is also a professor at the university. So she had previously worked with those actors as a movement coach, as a movement professor. And she had also done some training as intimacy coordinator. So we had somebody that they were really comfortable with. And, I'm a writer, and then when I'm producing, we're all trying to do so many jobs that no matter how caring and thoughtful we are, it's just really helpful to have somebody that is just thinking about that for the actors. I found that very useful. And we thought we were being really good and really trying to address all of the things. And then a couple things came up on set as far as like handling the footage. Who handles the footage? Like as far as having a DIT. We're not having a DIT. And so we ended up making some decisions kind of in the middle of production. And so I became DIT on top of a few other things because we didn't want extra people handling the footage. And we didn't want like a student that was unknown, which would have probably been the option. So we wanted to keep it as small as possible. And that's just something like we had thought of everything. And there were just things that came up as far as sensitivities. And so that was good. And it's not just handling intimacy and sex scenes, but also, the next project I'm working on involves having multiple perspectives and working with a lot of actors that are, I'm doing some projects where I'm doing different monologues and different scenes with actors that are of different minorities and different viewpoints. And that same care and thoughtfulness and trying to protect the actors that are involved. And, it's that same approach. I'm involving actors and I'm trying to make sure that I am not centering the material on me, but that I'm not exploiting people. I worked with an actress who has a disability and trying to represent her on screen and making sure that I'm doing service. And I'm working with some actors that are of different races, and I'm trying to make sure that I am not exploiting that. And I think that, this is just one film, but this is something, when you're trying to like branch out and like serve, when you have an ethic that you want to show more representation, you also have to do it in a way that is responsible and thoughtful and that is inclusive and that isn't exploitative, because that's something that I do see a little bit from people right now, that it's really easy to like, you have to be aware that you're involving collaborators and people want to be involved, and that you're not exploiting people.
That you may not, you have to recognize that good people like yourself can do thoughtless things sometimes.
Well, when you get on set, it's about getting the movie. It's about the shot. It's about getting what you want. It's about the story. And, there's so many points, the edit, there's so many opportunities to make it about the edit, about making it commercially viable, about making what will sell, what will be accessible. And you have a commitment to anybody that you've brought into the project to make sure that the project is something you have a responsibility to make sure that they feel comfortable that what you're making is what they wanted to be a part of. And I think it's, you know, that just extends, and you want them to feel good about it. You want it to be a group thing. So that's something I think I hopefully carry with me into every project I do.
And Kuba, you're as other people in this group are, you're a teacher of filmmaking as well. What did you learn about yourself as a director, particularly when it comes to questions of the representation of sexuality? What did you learn from Borowczyk's story?
Well, I would say that definitely, you know, for what I learned is the importance, or even the urgency of and the difficulty of re-envisioning or reinventing representations of sexuality, right, on the screen, because obviously, if, you know, in Borowczyk's times, one could say it was easier to be a path breaker because there was no path, right, like no sexual path, and now there is a sexual highway, right? So it's much more difficult to deal with these cliches and you know, and try to come up with something new. But definitely, I think what still stands in Borowczyk's approach, Borowczyk's output, I would say, is this attitude, you know, that you need to reinvent for yourself, that you need to reinvent sexuality on the screen, that it should be avant-garde, that it should be experimental, you know, because this is what sexuality is all about, right? It's not about cliches, and these sort of visual and film cliches that we deal with also sort of colonize our imagination, right? So it's important to decolonize our imaginations with our filmmaking. And I would say that if there is element, that's definitely it.
Great. Well, Kuba, thank you so much, and Rani Deighe as well, Jovan and Elegance. And I'd like to bring our curator and founder, Pearl Gluck, back in. Pearl? You're muted.
How am I muted?
There you go.
I'm still awake. It's 2:52 a.m. United States East Coast time. You kept me awake, which is amazing. This conversation was so deep. Went in really interesting directions. I'm not entirely surprised, Kevin. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your in-depth analysis of these films with the filmmakers. I'm sure y'all appreciated hearing his view of your work. I think what I would love to do before we leave is to just bring, I've been thinking a lot, listening to all of you, about what is it about sex that we just can't stop representing, looking at, dealing with, engaging with. And it can be such a source of pleasure and pain, and a question of engagement. And do you have to be alone? Do you have to be together? And I feel like it'd be nice to possibly end on having all of you, because you're such artists engaged with sex and sexuality, just talk about the pleasure and the joy part of it, the reason you're drawn to sex. And I don't necessarily mean what turns you on, though. If it goes in that direction, it is 2:53 a.m. We have no problem with that. I think it's the very thing that makes it so easy to abuse and so easy to violate. And you talked about the highway, you talked about decolonization. I feel like it would be so wonderful to end on the note. We usually start with, sexuality is so empowering. It's so pleasurable, and so many other things, dark, which can also be positive. And then we talk about what happens when it's taken advantage of. We're going to flip it tonight, clearly, because you've all wonderfully, responsibly, with ethics and agency and creativity, talked about why you've made your work and what you wanted to bring attention to. So let's flip it and say, but here's ways in which I would love to, work with a more sex positive approach in my work. So maybe talk a little bit about that. Why are you drawn to this subject? Kuba, why did you choose this in the first place? How does this fit into your work? And so, in other words, what do you want to see with regard to and I mean this in a positive way, that titillation and engagement and integration into the rest of our lives, that our sexuality and our intrigue around sex can be through the camera. I think that would be great.
Yeah.
And you know what, Kevin, you're not off the hook. I'm going to ask you the same question, believe it or not. I think that'll be fun to hear. No one ever asks Kevin, you know.
I'm actually ready for this question, since I've already talked.
You are, Kuba. I bet you are.
Yeah, I've been through with my psychoanalyst, you know, so I'm actually, you know, I have a ready-made answer. Well, it's interesting how actually, if only after the fact you sort of realize what were the reason behind your decision, right? Be it like in filmmaking or in life as such. And well, I think what I see now from the perspective, because it's already been like we started working on the film in 2013, so it's almost like 7 years, right, since the first initial idea. I would say that definitely, you know, I had this sort of typical Catholic background, like the typical Polish Catholic upbringing, which is all about guilt and not being able to talk about sexuality openly. So, like, for me, it was like, it sounds quite innocent, but like through Borowczyk, who was also like a Roman Catholic and a Pole, like involved in sexual revolution. Actually, it allowed me to you know, to deal with sexuality and to talk about sexuality openly. Maybe it's not like about my sexuality in particular, but you know, like for me, it was already a huge step. Actually, you know, to be able to be talking about eroticism and sexuality in the open, like I do with you guys now. So basically, definitely there was this reason, you know, like for me, that sort of sublimate my sexual guilt into Borowczyk's story and put it on screen. I don't know if it's positive. For me, it worked, but I don't know if I would recommend it. But definitely, it had some advantages.
Well, we have no clue, but I'm not so sure Borowczyk would mind that you used him as a way to explore sexuality more openly in your own films. Are you working on another film right now, and is it related at all?
Yeah, well, it's somehow related. It's about Andrzej Żuławski, so another Polish sort of strange surrealist figure, but it's about his unfinished film on the Silver Globe, and this is like the first and one of the first Polish and one of the first in the world like science fiction epic, which was stopped only 5 weeks before its completion in 1970s. And we're trying to find out what were the reason behind the political decision to stop the film. So if you think about it, there was only Space Odyssey and Andrzej Tarkowski's Solaris around at that time. So it was one of the really first big budget sort of Dune like science fiction epic in the works, and then a political decision came to stop it. And I won't say anything more to not to spoil it, but hopefully, you know, we can talk about it next year.
Oh, that'll be wonderful. Absolutely, in our pajamas. Absolutely. And Rani, what about you? What draws you to the subject of sex, and what is your hope for a sex positive approach through the camera?
I think there's two things. I mean, one, sex is a place where people come together and they can have totally different ideas of what's happening. They can have two totally different realities of what they think is happening or what they want from the moment, right? And that's so trying to figure out what the hell just happened or what is happening between two people in a relationship is sort of fascinating to me. And then just, I mean, from a woman's point of view or from, you know, a feminist point of view, we have a long history of films being made where women are the object of desire and are sexualized on film. And so to approach it from a woman's point of view, or to look at like, I mean, I like doing sort of sex scenes or intimate scenes or exploring sexuality that are kind of comic and where they're not actually, they're not necessarily titillating, like they give you other feelings, right? Or like where sex is not about sex, I have like a few films now where sex has been part of it. And in texting, it was like a comedic sex scene where it's not sexualized. It has to feel like it's a sex scene for that's really happening, but it's comedic. And then I have, Heather, where it's all about a girl that wants to become sexual, that's too young, right? That doesn't really know what she's getting into. And it is about the fact that we don't talk about it openly. It's a weird, like, if most of the time we don't talk about it honestly and openly and what it really means, at least not in American culture. Kids, I'm in a state where there's abstinence only education. So my students are learning from it from all sorts of other places. They're not learning from it, learning about it. What is it? And I think we spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it is and what it means to us personally and what we want. And there's also this weird moral compass in a religion that gets posed onto it, and we're all judging each other for it. So it's just a fascinating kind of thing that it's really intrinsic to a human life, whatever our sexuality is and what our relationship is to it and how we relate to people with it. And yet at the same time, it's so mysterious and judged.
Yeah, thank you. And what about you, Elegance? I'll just say Elegance and Jovan, although I know you're both going to answer separately. What drew you to the subject of sex, and what do you want to see as more sex positive messaging in films and in front of the camera?
I like sex because I'm sexy. I'm good at sex. Sex is fun. So I just like sex in general as a human being. And what draws me to sex as a subject to talk about in my films is that it's just often it's the most vulnerable you can be. That instant where you decide to like form some sort of cosmic, kinetic, physical, orgasmic bond with another. It's a pretty humbling realization to know that, the pleasure that you experience requires permission and requires participation, and that can really kind of just brings everyone down to a real manageable size, and what I hope to see happen in films for sex positivity, I hope we get a bit more nudity than we've ever had before. We need to see female orgasms on screen and full erections and, so much more than we get to see. So there's so much more happening in our bedrooms than, especially the American cinema allows us to look at. And I think it would be nice to see something on screen that represents the true. I mean, the thing is, American movies are so consumed with fucking, and there's so much more to sex than fucking, and it would be nice to see more of that on screen without it being a punchline either, without like actually reveling in the fact that for some people, the greatest sexual act is tickling, and for other people, it's peeing, and for other people, it's all this stuff is happening that everybody is doing, but no one is talking about, and it is almost impossible to show for a profit, at least if you're not doing porn,
Mm-hmm.
So, it'd be nice to see that change.
Mm-hmm. And Jovan?
Yeah, so I guess, I have a sort of intrigue about sex. So my other films have sort of had that in their themes. I grew up in the Black Baptist church, not the
spirit.
No, stop. No, don't. Mom, just cut it off. But I'd say that to say that, that was a repressive environment, and, I was a rule following person, and, it was something that, I don't think I understood that well. And so when I became an adult, I just sort of wanted to explore that, and I needed to figure out a way how to explore that in a safe way that made sense, that made me not feel uncomfortable, because I just don't want to overwhelm myself. And I chose art to explore a lot of that. And I think, just kind of backing off what Elegance said about the vulnerability part, I think putting that in films, I think I come back to that again and again, because, you know, part of it for me is a fantasy. Part of it for me is a nightmare. You know, it's a dream. It's a, what if this happened? Wouldn't it be incredible? Or this is something that I'm actually really, really scared of, you know, and Buck actually has all of that. You know, I think I felt that I was in New York City, you know, in art school, and it was this gay environment. And it was sort of like, well, I feel
sorry.
It was, well, not in school, but I felt like, you know, I felt like an outsider in that. And I feel like that sort of is in Lynn's DNA of like, even though he is in this relationship, he does feel like he's on the outside of, you know, sort of a sexual life that it seems that a lot of other people are having, and he's not. So yeah, you know, I just am, you know, putting, you know, I think there's a lot of people that can identify with that.
Mm-hmm.
Often see characters like that in films. I think, you know, we see that the hero always gets laid. They're great at sex, and everyone is, you know, happy, you know, and I think, you know, I want to reflect a different kind of experience. You know, I think it's important to, you know, I think show a multitude of results from sex, and you know, there's different ways to be pleasured from it. Like Elegance said, you know, everyone has different end goals with it, and I think to me it's about being non-judgmental, you know, and inviting everyone in, and you know, so that's sort of how I look at it. And I want to, you know, use Buck. Buck is an extreme example, but looking at some of my past work, you know, say a teenager who is, you know, a little more latent in their sexuality, but just sort of one moment of expression in an awkward way.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of different ways to show it.
Thank you so much. And Kevin, I said you weren't off the hook, but you can get off the hook if you want to. But I would love for you to talk, maybe conclude this segment by talking about what you view as sex positive in film, and or want to see coming out in films, and so on. And then we'll just say good night or good morning, depending on how you look at it.
I think, I mean, all three of these films, to me, I mean, really hung together in the way that they offered a kind of cautionary note, like three different portraits of what people thought were liberatory, but turned out in very different ways to not be liberatory. And they're good cautionary tales. They're good warnings to be socially, psychologically, culturally thoughtful and present and careful, so that we can actually be liberated. So that's, I mean, I guess if I was going to put it in the most, you know, direct way, I would say, I guess I look forward to a time in film classes where I won't be having to warn people that there are images of sexuality in a film. I understand why it may be important to do that, but I think it's sad that we're in that place. But films like this show me a future where that will change.
That's wonderful, Kevin. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful way to conclude this segment. And we did go over, but I think we brought up some really exciting ways to think about the subject. And I can't wait to continue these conversations with all of you. We shall see you in a few more hours on our next live directors Q&A. Thank you so much for hanging out with us late night at the Center Film Festival. Jovan James, Elegance Bratton, Rani Deighe Crowe, Kuba Mikurda, and our wonderful host, Kevin Hagopian. Thank you so much.
It's been a total pleasure. Thank you.